In 1985, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez, unleashed a brutal crime spree across Southern California, terrorizing Los Angeles neighborhoods with home invasions, murders, sexual assaults, and satanic markings that left communities locking their doors in fear. This in-depth retelling examines Ramirez's reign of terror, the investigation that traced a single fingerprint to his capture, and the survivors, detectives, and citizens who brought an end to one of California's darkest chapters. The Night Stalker terror. The summer California nailed its windows shut. Los Angeles, in the summer of 1985, was suffocating. A brutal heat wave had draped itself over the city, baking the asphalt and leaving the air thick and stagnant. In a normal year, Southern Californians would have responded as they always did, throwing open their windows to catch the evening Pacific breeze, leaving screen doors unlatched, and sleeping with just a thin sheet. But the summer of 1985 was not normal. Despite temperatures hovering near triple digits, the people of Los Angeles were locking their doors. They were sliding wooden dowels into window tracks. They were buying deadeners, alarm systems, guard dogs in record numbers. Hardware stores sold out of window bars and ammunition. Families sweltered in the dark, choosing the stifling, breathless heat over the terrifying alternative. They were hiding from a phantom, a monster the press had dubbed the Night Stalker. Serial killers were not a new phenomenon to California. The state had endured the Zodiac, the Manson family, and the Hillside Stranglers. But there was a grim, twisted logic to most serial killers. A specific type of victim, a preferred weapon, a distinct geographic hunting ground. The Night Stalker had none of these. He was a creature of pure, erratic chaos. He struck in the affluent suburbs and in the gritty inner city. His victims were men and women, children and the elderly. Some were Asian, some were white, some were Hispanic. He used handguns, knives, machetes, firearms, and hammers. There was no pattern to predict, no profile to hide behind. If you had a pulse, and if you had an unlocked window, you were a target. The true horror began to crystallize in the public consciousness in March of 1985. On the evening of March 17th, 22-year-old Maria Hernandez pulled into her garage in Rosemead. As she stepped out of her car, a tall, gaunt figure stepped out of the shadows. He raised a .22 caliber handgun and fired. The bullet struck the keys Maria was holding, ricocheting into her chest. She fell to the ground, playing dead. The Phantom stepped over her, walked into her house, and fatally shot her roommate, Dale Okazaki. Less than an hour later, the same man pulled a young woman named Tsai Lian Yu from her car in Monterey Park, shooting her twice. She died before she could tell paramedics who had attacked her. 2 days later, the violence escalated to a level of depravity that shocked even hardened LAPD detectives. In the quiet suburb of Whittier, 64-year-old Vincent Zazzara and his 44-year-old wife Maxine were asleep. The killer entered through an unlocked door. He shot Vincent in the head. What he did to Maxine was so brutal, so unspeakably violent, that detectives had to step out of the crime scene to breathe. When the police processed the Zazzara home, they found something that would become the killer's chilling signature. Drawn on the wall, in Maxine's own lipstick, was a crude pentagram. The Night Stalker was not just a murderer. He was a self-proclaimed emissary of Satan. As spring bled into the sweltering summer, the attacks came faster. The killer would creep into homes in the dead of night, dressed entirely in black. He would often shoot the husband immediately, eliminating the primary threat, before turning his attention to the women and children. Survivors told harrowing tales. They woke to the smell of rotting teeth and unwashed skin. They opened their eyes to see a man with a wild, hollow stare, his teeth decayed and black, holding a weapon to their face. He would force them to swear allegiance to Satan. He would demand they tell him where their valuables were, rifling through drawers, eating food from their refrigerators, casually lingering in the homes where he had just committed unspeakable atrocities. He was a ghost who left behind a trail of blood, stolen jewelry, and shattered minds. And the police had almost nothing to go on. The task of catching the Night Stalker fell to a massive task force, spearheaded by Los Angeles County Sheriff Detectives Frank Salerno and Gil Carrillo. Salerno was a legendary investigator who had helped catch the Hillside Stranglers. Carrillo was younger, relentless, and possessed a gut instinct that would prove vital. Carrillo was the first to suggest that the seemingly unconnected murders, rapes, and burglaries across the county were the work of a single man. Initially, his superiors scoffed. The weapons were too varied, the victims too diverse, but the ballistics matched, the cruelty matched, and then there was the footprint. At several crime scenes, investigators found a distinct shoe print in the flower beds beneath the victims' windows. It was an Avia running shoe, size 11.5. Carrillo contacted the manufacturer and learned a startling fact. That specific model in that specific size was incredibly rare. Only 6 pairs had been shipped to Los Angeles. It was a threat, but it wasn't enough to catch a killer. By August, the terror reached a fever pitch. The Night Stalker, realizing the heat was on in Los Angeles, drove north to San Francisco. In the dead of night, he broke into the home of Peter and Barbara Pan. He shot Peter dead and left Barbara for dead, drawing another lipstick pentagram on the wall. The mayor of San Francisco, Dianne Feinstein, held a press conference. In her effort to assure the public that the police were closing in, she accidentally released highly classified details of the investigation, including the fact that the killer used a specific .25 caliber handgun and wore size 11.5 Avia shoes. In Los Angeles, Detectives Salerno and Carrillo watched the broadcast in horror. The killer now knew exactly what evidence the police had. That night, the Night Stalker threw his Avia shoes off the Golden Gate Bridge. It seemed the investigation had been dealt a fatal blow. But the killer was growing arrogant, and arrogance breeds mistakes. On August 24th, 1985, the Night Stalker struck in Mission Viejo, deep in Orange County. He broke into the home of Bill Carnes and his fiancée, Inez Erickson. He shot Bill in the head, assaulted Inez, and demanded she swear to Satan. But Inez Erickson was a survivor. As the killer left, she dragged herself to the window. Through the darkness, she saw an orange Toyota station wagon pulling away. It was a massive break. Even better, a teenager in the neighborhood had noticed the suspicious orange car earlier that night and jotted down a partial license plate. Days later, the stolen orange Toyota was found abandoned in a parking lot in the Rampart district of Los Angeles. The car was impounded and meticulously dusted for prints. It was a painstaking process. The killer had wiped the car down, but he had missed one spot, the rearview mirror. Investigators lifted a single partial fingerprint. In 1985, fingerprint identification was usually a manual, agonizing slow process. But the LAPD had just acquired a brand new, state-of-the-art computer system called AFIS, Automated Fingerprint Identification System. They fed the partial print into the machine. For hours, the computer whirred and processed. Then, it spit out a match. The print belonged to a 25-year-old drifter from El Paso, Texas, with a minor criminal record for traffic violations and drug possession. His name was Richard Ramirez. The police pulled his mugshot. It matched the survivor sketches perfectly. The sharp cheekbones, the hollow, staring eyes, the dark, unkempt hair. On August 30th, the police held a press conference. They released Ramirez's name and photograph to the public. Every television station interrupted its program. Every newspaper scrambled to print a special evening edition. The face of the monster was finally dragged into the light. While his face was being plastered across every screen and front page in California, Richard Ramirez was entirely oblivious. He had taken a bus to Tucson, Arizona to visit his brother, completely unaware that he was now the most wanted man in America. On the morning of August 31st, Ramirez stepped off a Greyhound bus in downtown Los Angeles. He walked into a convenience store to buy a donut and a soda. As he stood at the counter, he glanced down at the newspaper rack. Staring back at him from the front page of La Opinión was his own face, beneath the Spanish headline, El Matador Nocturno, Night Killer. Panic seized him. He looked up and saw the store clerk staring at him, then down at the paper, then back at him. The clerk reached for the phone. Ramirez pulled it. He ran out of the store and drifted across the Santa Ana freeway, dodging speeding cars in a desperate bid for freedom. He made his way into the working-class, predominantly Latino neighborhood of East Los Angeles. He was sweating, exhausted, and terrified. He ran onto Hubbard Street and saw a woman, Angelina de la Torre, getting into her red Ford Mustang. Ramirez yanked the door open, grabbed her by the hair, and shoved her out of the way, trying to steal the car. But Ramirez had chosen the wrong neighborhood. Angelina screamed. Her husband, Manuel, who was sitting on their porch, heard his wife cry out. He didn't know about the Night Stalker. He just saw a scrawny man attacking his wife. Manuel grabbed a metal fence post, sprinted to the car, and smashed Ramirez over the head. Ramirez stumbled out of the car and ran down the street, but the commotion had drawn the neighbors. Men poured out of their houses. Ramirez tried to carjack another vehicle, but the neighbors were armed. A man named Julio showered him with blows. Another neighbor hit him with a steel pipe. Ramirez, the terrifying phantom of the night, was now a cornered rat, fleeing from the very citizens he had terrorized. He ran until he could run no more, collapsing in the dirt. The neighborhood mob surrounded him. They had seen the morning papers. They knew exactly who was bleeding in the dust at their feet. El Matador, someone shouted. It's the killer! The beating intensified. By the time the first LAPD cruiser screeched onto Hubbard Street, Richard Ramirez was begging for his life. He raised his bloodied hands to the police officers, pleading with them to save him from the furious crowd. The Night Stalker's reign of terror ended not in a blaze of dark glory, but in the dirt of an East LA street, subdued by the courage of ordinary people. The trial of Richard Ramirez was a circus. He reveled in the media attention. He wore dark sunglasses in the courtroom. He flashed a pentagram drawn on his palm to the cameras and muttered, "Hail Satan." Bizarrely, he attracted a legion of female groupies who attended the trial daily, sending him love letters and fighting for his attention. But the evidence was insurmountable. The survivor testimonies were heartbreaking and damning. The fingerprints, the ballistics, the stolen jewelry found in his possession, it all painted an undeniable picture of a sadistic, remorseless killer. On September 20th, 1989, Richard Ramirez was convicted of 13 counts of murder, 5 attempted murders, 11 sexual assaults, and 14 burglaries. He was sentenced to die in California's gas chamber. As he was led out of the courtroom, Ramirez turned to the press and sneered. "Big deal. Death always went with the territory. See you in Disneyland." He would never see the execution chamber. Richard Ramirez spent 24 years on death row at San Quentin State Prison, his body slowly decaying just as his teeth had. In June 2013, at the age of 53, he died of complications from B-cell lymphoma. He died quietly, in a hospital bed, a stark contrast to the violent, terrifying deaths he had forced upon his victims. Today, the summer of 1985 remains a dark scar on the psyche of California. Richard Ramirez shattered the illusion of safety. He taught an entire generation that monsters do not just exist in movies. They walk among us. They don't always have a motive. They don't always have a type. Sometimes they are simply born of malice, slipping through the cracks of society to prey on the innocent. But the story of the Night Stalker is not just a story of a monster. It is also the story of Inez Erickson, who found the strength to look out a window after surviving a nightmare. It is the story of Detectives Salerno and Carrillo, who sifted through the madness to find a single fingerprint. And it is the story of the men and women of Hubbard Street, who heard a cry for help and ran toward the danger, armed with nothing but fence posts and courage. The Night Stalker brought absolute darkness to California. But in the end, it was the light of the community that dragged him out from under the bed, ensuring that the people of Los Angeles could finally, once again, open their windows to the evening breeze.